Welcome back to Crossroads of Cognizance. Hello, everyone. We took a small break, but we are back with you, back with community. This is the show where we have created a live discussion space and community space, really, that incorporates magic, spirituality, and energy. And, ultimately, we hope to expand your mind and to get you thinking on various topics in new ways or to have you share with us so that we can grow because we are both forever the student. Now, if this is your first time joining us, we want to encourage you to like and subscribe so you can know when we're live. It's what's Thursdays, but every now and again for holidays, for personal reasons, we like to go with the flow, and so you may miss out on a show. But if you hit that like and subscribe button, you'll always know when we go live. Also, um, you know, it gives you an opportunity to connect with us in a different way in terms of the comments section and to add commentary or to let us know the discussion topics that you would like to hear. We have prepared them. So we have some new things about the show, pre-prepared topics, but we want to hear from you as well. And outside of all of that, we have some introductions to make. So I am Dahlia Rose. I am the founder of the Conduit School. It's an online learning space. I serve my community as a healer, a teacher, and a conduit for high vibration energies. I teach and guide my students with spiritual development, energy work, courses, meditation, counseling, and ultimately, my goal is to change the face of healing and the culture surrounding healing as well. But I'm not alone on this journey in this show. So
You should actually cut and paste that intro. That was perfect. That was absolutely beautiful.
thank
My
you.
name's my name's Katrina Raspold. I am the creator of the Bio-Universal System of Health and Healing. And I also am a professional witch. I do spell work for people, readings as well, Lenormand and tarot. I'm an instructor. I do different classes that are available at crossroadsoccult.com. And I also, there's the third thing, I'm an author. I'm a published author. I've written several books. And yeah, pretty excited because I just turned book 7 of an 8-book series into my editor. We published 6 on New Year's Eve, book 6. And so book 7 is done now, and it just went to the editor who will clean it all up and make it beautiful. And then we publish. So I expect to have that published by spring. This book series, which is a fictional series about post-Arthurian Britain and Avalon. And I thought this was going to be the constipation I would die with. I thought I would never, ever get this series finished. I literally had fans who died without getting to see the rest of the series. And so I'm so excited. This is the big thing in Katrina world right now, is getting this goddamn series finished. So I've got one more book to write after this. I do not have one letter of that word written or that book written. I've got it diagrammed to a fare thee well, and I'm excited to get started on that this week. So that's my new big thing. I don't anticipate any new nonfiction coming out for a while. I do not expect to write one word of fiction after this series is done. 8 books, each one anywhere from 80 to 150,000 words. Okay. I did not want to George R.R. Martin this shit and just not get it done. So it's really exciting that this is happening. So one of the things you all may or may not know about me and Dahlia is that we are both prior brick and mortar business owners. We both closed our shops last fall. And so we are together in this. We are in this new frontier that really speaks to our subject matter of today. Because one of the things we're going to talk about, I hope, in our trauma discussion is that trauma isn't always something bad happening to you. Trauma can also be when good things happen. But the fact is that when you're a Virgo, any change is trauma.
Tend to be
so
like
we are the face of trauma right now.
Before we move on too far, when you mentioned you had some fans that passed before your books were finished, I had this like flash of you doing a seance and slash book reading just so
I
that their
should.
souls
I
could be
should.
at
Roberta.
rest.
Roberta Rains is her name, and she's lovely, and she absolutely was one of the first promoters of the Daughters of Avalon. And man, she died along about book 5. And I just pictured this skeleton sitting in front of her computer waiting for the message that it
So one
was
of the things
done.
that
And I say that with all respect to Roberta, who I knew personally. And she was just an amazing woman. But she would just say, if you could just really hurry up with that book, I would appreciate it. It's like 3 years and I haven't put out a book. So I
one
feel
of the
that.
things
Sorry,
that you're
Roberta.
going to quickly know and love about us is our dark sense of humor.
Yeah. So I really need to just give the book to Gladys to read, and she can just send it on to Roberta.
Yes, an amazing medium she is.
She is. And there's Bram. Hello, Bram.
Yes. Hello to our people. Look, I can't even see the comments here.
I don't
hello,
know
Bram.
about you. I'm sorry, I'm talking over you. My Meniere's is really stupid today. I don't know about you, Dahlia. I can't comment. I can't write an actual comment. I don't have a space to do that. I'm just saying. Not sure why. Let's see. I can on private chat. It'll let me chat with everyone in the studio. But on the comments, I assume because they're coming in from both Facebook and YouTube or something like that. Yeah, I don't have a comment spot. But that's okay.
Weird.
I'll just say, yeah. Okay, that's all I got.
Thank
you for being here.
The hauntings of Mercury retrograde. We'll probably have to figure that out because you should have that ability for sure. I know I can't comment on both at the same time, but I can switch back and forth to one and the other. So that's weird. But, thank you. This actually is a great segue into how to communicate with us. So while we're on the show, if you're on Facebook, we have to see that you're there. So you have to click the broadcast and that'll give us permission to talk to you there. And then if you're on YouTube, you don't have to do anything. You just have to show up. And that is probably 90% of life, isn't it? Look at all the lessons rolling out already. You have to show up. So
you gotta show up.
We are talking about reframing trauma today. I think, and I was mentioning this during the show, with 2020 exposing a lot, it's so funny that is such a marker in our decade. 2020 revealed a lot, opened up a lot, and I feel like as a person who loves the English language, I am both saddened and interested in how it evolves. Which leads me to say, I think that we began to overuse a lot of words. And so I thought it would be helpful as far as our discussion to give a real definition to trauma, both maybe personal and looks like Merriam-Webster has a say-so in all of this. So personally, I think that trauma is something that it's something that drastically shifts who you are. So it's not going to be the time that you stubbed your toe and it broke, unless, the hospital visit was intense and, you kept getting switched doctors and your family couldn't come back to the emergency room. And so it triggered your abandonment issues. And, to me, trauma is a multi-layered process. That is not simply, like Katrina said, it's not simply sad, but it dramatically shifts who you are at your core. Science has gone on to note how trauma with other people can reshape your brain or reorganize the neural pathways in your head. So trauma is not something to be played around with. And there's a difference between saying, this made me sad, and this was traumatic for me. The English language keeps getting shorter and shorter, and so we keep filling in words, I think, where they don't belong ultimately. But and when I say don't belong, I'm not here grandstanding on a dictionary. I am simply saying for the sake of understanding, which is part of my karma. So in any case, Katrina, what does trauma mean to you before we get Miriam involved?
That I tend to look at it from a healing perspective. And when we are doing a cleansing on somebody, we have trauma show up. It shows up in the form of a bubble that's near the yolk of the egg. The varying the sizes. Well, we may have small ones, little bubbles. We may have giant ones. But it becomes about shifting how we engage the world. So trauma is going to affect our ability to connect, whether we're connecting with an experience or we're connecting with a person. It shifts who, like you said, it shifts who we are and how we define ourselves. And so I think that it's just an event that is so significant that it creates change of some kind. And what's interesting is that change can actually be the trauma. So it kind of becomes this cycle.
Yeah.
So we will definitely get into the different ways that people respond to traumas and how that influences their quality of life. But one of the things that stands out for me in the definition of trauma is that when we are doing a cleansing on somebody and we observe that there's trauma present, what this is telling us is that the way that they engage the world has been shifted. That is not going to heal until they are able to reconcile that trauma within their spirit. So trauma
Absolutely.
it's not something that can get fixed. It's not something a healer can fix. We can soothe that trauma, but we cannot fix it. And so I think that when we're defining trauma, people tend to look at it as a temporary situation when it can have lifelong effects. So we have to look at it sometimes as actually cataclysmic because we're not going to come back from it. But, sometimes the human spirit has such phenomenal resilience that sometimes we can work through and heal that trauma. So I think that defining trauma is really like nailing jello to the wall because it's so individual. We have some people that just the least little thing all the time is trauma for them. They live in a constant state of acquiring new trauma. And we have other people that go through tremendous loss and tremendous experience and are able to work through it very quickly and assimilate it into a healthy configuration of who they are. So trauma is just weird. I mean, the definition of trauma is it's just weird. And it's personal and it's very specific to that person. So that's my long definition.
But it requires that lengthy discussion, right? Because like you said, it's so individuated. Now, I mean, even let's bring Merriam-Webster into this because it gets even more strange. So according to Merriam-Webster, we have trauma defined as an injury such as a wound to living tissue caused by an extrinsic agent, a disordered psychic or behavioral state resulting from severe mental or emotional stress or physical injury, an emotional upset, an agent, force, or mechanism that causes trauma. I don't know how trauma can trauma can define itself apparently, but even these are very definitions that don't get to the core of what trauma can look like. So making that distinction that we've done here, like Katrina was saying, it's not something that you can just, ultimately rub an egg on and it will disappear. It's a process, right? Or you can't rub a crystal on it and hope for the best. I loved how you define that because the reconciliation is really what we are leaning towards when we talk about reframing trauma. That's one of probably many ways to reframe or to reconcile trauma. I mean, there's other things like EMDR or, therapy, obviously, counseling, things like that. But even those have their roots in reconciliation rather than um, hoping for some way to spiritually bypass the process of moving through the trauma. You have to face it. And there's different safe ways to do that. I found myself in multiple conversations. One, trying to define trauma or an experience of mine as not traumatic, for people who are learning or talking through people to say, okay, well, you know, what part of you feels like this is traumatic? Let's talk about your personal definition of trauma. Um, and then with the reconciliation of it and the reframing, we often have conversations about how that trauma rematerializes in life through other people, and that it doesn't have to necessarily be through the original circumstance. And I think that comes with reframing too, because reframing allows you to recognize. What are your thoughts on reframing trauma?
I think reframing trauma is one of the most vital tools that we can use. And what's really significant about what that definition said about trauma that we did not include in our definitions is that trauma comes from an outside source.
Mm.
And so when we're reframing, the obvious thing to consider is we are going to be thinking along the lines of, okay, I've had this trauma. This is something that was done to me.
Mm-hmm.
And that can be helpful in the sense that we can relieve some of the accountability that a person who comes to us has for what they were done. If you were abused as a child, you did not cause that. I've had so many
Right.
adults say, if I had just been a better kid, if I had been better behaved, I wouldn't have been abused. And no, you were raised by abusers. And granted, you might have been raised by abusers. He did not know how to parent in a different way. But that doesn't change the fact that it was inflicted upon you and you did not deserve for that to happen. And sometimes that's the approach we have to take in the reframing, is to take them out of the space of accountability. Whereas with some people with trauma, they're traumatized by something that was done to them, but it was something they very obviously orchestrated and put into motion. So they're traumatized by how a person responds to something that they said when they said it in a way that evokes
That response.
that response. Right. And so there's times when we're reframing and we have to encourage a little bit of accountability so that that person feels empowered enough to keep future traumas at bay a little bit more. So it's really, because trauma comes from an outside source, it's a real tightrope, especially for us as healers, because we have to know how to encourage that reframing in a positive way. And for those of you who don't know, reframing means that we take the trauma as stated by the client and just restate it in a different way so that they have a different perspective on what actually happened. I've had people that say, I don't know what's wrong with me. This happened, this happened, this happened. And I can't get grounded. I can't think since this happened. I don't know why I'm so upset. And you're saying, my God, you just went through an incredible trauma. Of course, you're not able to focus. Of course, you're struggling. And they don't even recognize what happened to them as trauma. To them, that's just life. It's just something that happened when you're like, my God, you were in a car accident. You had both of your parents die within 2 years of each other. This happened, this happened. We think of trauma as living in certain little boxes.
Mm-hmm.
We don't think of trauma as being, I was fired unexpectedly from my job. Or trauma as, I had to cancel my wedding because my fiance met somebody else. They don't think of that as trauma. They just think of it as insults sometimes. So our job in reframing is to say, wow, what is your involvement? And it refers back to another show that we did on toxic positivity.
Right.
Because we can't always be saying things like, well, you drew this experience to you.
And that awareness piece, you're also bringing space into the you're bringing awareness to the buildup of trauma at times, that ability for each of us to sit with a person and to say, okay, this plus this plus this probably equals trauma, or what was missing from your process? Were you not able to meditate as often? Were you not able to get outside and go on your walks? Or it doesn't even have to be a spiritual thing that grounds you. It could just be sleep, and you become more susceptible to trauma or being triggered or things like that. So awareness is key, and reframing, or the conversation of reframing, allows us to really get to the core of some things that may be missed, because the brain is only designed to pick up so much. And it is the brain is such a complicated thing that we don't even see birth as trauma. But I have come across countless Peter Levine lectures that talk about the birthing process being traumatic for both the mother and the fetus, even though it's natural. And so that, plus being born into an abusive family, plus being blamed for the family's position in life, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, you will be digging, like, pick up your shovel, because you're going to be digging to the core of that. And you will need to reframe to say, hey, there were a lot of birth choices made prior to my arrival, and I was not responsible, like I said, or like Katrina said, externalizing that process.
One of the things that we do as healers as well, and I do this what feels like an unusual amount of time, is giving someone permission to acknowledge an experience as trauma. Often it's almost as though they can minimize what happened if they don't stop and think about an event being traumatic. And you can see them sort of disassociating from the event. And so their spirit, their amygdala is blown wide open with this fight, flight, or freeze. And their spirit is responding to this incredible trauma that they've had, but their brain has shut that down and is saying, we got to take care of business. We got to keep moving. So we're just going to pretend like this didn't happen. We're going to push this aside. We're going to focus and train forward, and we're not going to look at what just happened. And that's where we get those giant trauma bubbles in the egg, is from people that are not, I don't want to say taking responsibility, because that's not the right framework, but they're not allowing themselves permission to stop what they're doing and look at the trauma that has happened so that they can effectively heal it. And we can't heal that trauma without the participation of that client.
Right. And what you spoke of is, for me, it's connecting to when people also sort of externalize or blame, like they won't connect with the traumatic situation, so they're more apt to say, well, this was so and so's fault, or they did this to me, but not from a place of that actually being the case, but just to ignore the fact that maybe they said yes to something that they didn't want to say yes to, or that personal responsibility piece is big. So it sounds like ultimately we're talking about reframing being a space of regaining balance between where you are in space and time currently in your traumatic state, and where you were in space and time at the time that the trauma happened. And the complicated configuration of what actually happened and what your brain told you happened, and where you can slowly piece together acceptance, because I think that's ultimately what reframing leads to, is acceptance.
I agree. You know, we had a plan when I did a lot of work with pregnant women and laboring women. I was a doula and I taught childbirth classes and worked in an OBGYN office. And one of the things that was really fascinating to me is women would come in when they were pregnant and say, you know, I don't know what to do about this, but every single time I eat pizza, I get a heartburn. Every single time I get heartburn. And it's like, don't eat pizza. That's what you do. If you're getting if you're pregnant and you're getting heartburn when you eat pizza, don't eat pizza, or eat a different kind of pizza. It's very simple. If you're having a negative response, don't do this. And so what I see with my clients a lot is they create trauma in the sense that they will say, I've got this family event that I've got to go to. My family's not supportive of my lifestyle and who I am as a person. They're negative, toxic people, but I have to go. And so I know I'm going to go in there and it's going to be awful. And then 2 weeks later, they're back on my couch and they're saying, oh my gosh, I went. It was worse than it ever was before. It's like this every single time when, yes, they have had a trauma, but they also knew in advance this was going to be traumatic. And they have the power to say, I am not going to do this because this is going to be traumatic. So accountability in trauma is a weird liminal space because you don't want to blame the victim, but at the same
Right.
time you want them to be able to have empowerment over self-subjecting themselves to trauma, so to speak. And so yeah, you know, I think that another thing that tends to come up is these people that over identify with their abuser. So they have trauma caused by a partner or a parent or somebody that they know. And they go back into, well, they had a really terrible childhood. And I know that they're just
Mm,
responding to old relationships that they've had. And I know they've had a really hard life. So I'm going to allow myself to be traumatized
mm.
repeatedly because I understand where they're coming from. And yeah,
Yeah.
get right up on that cross, man. But I tell you, hammering in that last nail is just a bitch. So,
You know, in everything that we're talking about, as far as defining the trauma and the different kinds that we've seen in our perspective practices, um, there's also this piece of the energy of the trauma. So you have the event, and then you have small micro things like, you know, well, that person was wearing these particular things, or this character. Every time I hear this song, I have these experiences. And so this is why trauma is so complex. This is why it takes a bit more of a lengthy discussion, because
mhm.
whenever you are dealing with a traumatic situation and you have not yet had the ability to reframe, and I think a lot of us have not, like from a young age, probably didn't even know that reframing was available. When you are dealing with the trauma, when you are triggered, you have to remember that your body and your mind basically go back in time to that moment and cluster together all of those feelings and all that happened, where you felt like a failure, where you felt like you could have done something different, where you felt oppressed, all of that. And it comes bubbling to the surface and reattaches to a new person, a new situation. And then you have to go through the process of not only reframing the trauma, but how you associate with this new person that may have triggered you, or the new situation that may have triggered you. And so it's deep and complex. Again, you can't throw a crystal at it, you can't throw herbs at it, you can't throw an egg at it. Although I am a huge proponent of going away to do ceremonies and things with indigenous people, um, not to fast track it, but to gain a depth of understanding that you probably could not gain in the States. Um, so I throw that little plug in there. go away to a retreat
I
outside
think
of the United States.
one of the most common feelings that comes with trauma that is the hardest to heal is that feeling of helplessness.
Mm.
That something is happening to us that we can't stop. Now, I talked about a situation that you could avoid, that you could say, you know, every time I go to Aunt Matilda's house for Sunday brunch, Uncle Ed gets drunk and starts his racist rants, and Aunt Sarah starts, you know, punditing for her political approach, and so is involved with their religious stance, and it's just too much, and it's directed a lot at me, and I can't do it, you know. So you can choose to remove yourself from that, but a lot of times traumas are things that we don't choose
Mm.
that happen to us, and that feeling of helplessness is, it reminds us of being a child and of being of times when we were children and things were done to us, or that we were put in situations where our parents just said, oh, we're moving to a new state because dad got a much better job, this is great. And we're like, but my friends, I've been friends with these people since I was little, and you know, oh, it's going to be wonderful, you'll make all new friends, you'll be the new kid. And we just have to move. You know, we have to have our entire lives ripped up because something's happening with mom and dad. So that feeling of helplessness, of just something is happening to me and I can't control it. You know, people have varying responses to that experience, and we all have that experience.
Absolutely. And I think we're entering into the domain of when trauma can come from a positive place. I mean, I can recall working with mentors and teachers and wanting to spend every waking moment with them just to learn and get what I could from them in terms of expanding my own life or healing or whatever they had to give me. I mean, they could make a macaroni spell card and I'd be like, thank you. And I'd put it in a box and, you know, it would become treasure. I might have been a crow in another life, but that in and of itself, it's coming from a good place. It's coming from a place of admiration. But that could have been, you know, I wanted to always check in with my mentors and my teachers, but even that could have been traumatic for them as they needed breaks, as they needed time off. I know for me personally, switching from a storefront where people could just walk up and speak with me and, you know, we would carry on conversation, going to alone time for a period of months, I did not realize how much energy, additional energy I was carrying until it wasn't
Mm-hmm.
there. And it has definitely been a journey to say, okay, am I going to do that again? Because it it was so positive, it was amazing, and I would not have changed the past for the world. And this empty space around me feels really positive because I can hear what I need to hear. I can develop where I want to develop, and you know, it's very interesting. But it the way that I was holding energy for those folks, and again, I still love all of you. The way I was holding those energy for those folks dramatically changed who I was. And so as that dissipated, it was like, oh, I get to meet new Dahlia. Hi, how are you? Oh, you hate this? Okay. You know, or you need additional naps? What is that about? So trauma, even in the positive.
Mm-hmm.
But
Definitely so.
yeah.
Yeah. One thing that I think that I see, and again, this is about the reframing and the way that people perceive their traumas, is I see a lot of trauma contests for the good and for the bad, so to speak, where
Mm,
people will minimize their traumas by saying, oh, but that's nothing like so and so experienced, or I feel even bad responding to this because this person lost their child, or this person, you know, had this happened to them, and so they get comparative with their traumas, or they'll get comparative in the opposite direction and say, oh, you think that's bad, Listen to what
Right.
happened to me. And the thing is that even though your trauma comes from the outside, it's about you. And one of the things Dr. Phil said that really stuck with me is, when somebody is in a hospital bed with 2 broken arms, and next to them is a person with 2 broken arms and 2 broken legs, their arms don't hurt less because there's somebody with graver injuries beside them. And it's not a contest. Trauma is not a contest. You don't have to reach a certain level for it to be considered trauma. You just have to have been affected in a way that it changes how you engage the world. And so you should never feel bad seeking out help if you're finding that you just can't get over this hump. And a lot of times when people come to me thinking they've been cursed, what we're seeing instead, because they're like, somebody must have thrown a curse at me because I can't move forward no matter what I do. I keep trying all these different things and they just don't pan out. And even things that should have worked are not coming through for me. You look at their egg and it's just filled with trauma balls. And it's like, no, you're being held in place
Right.
until you resolve these traumas. Then it's going to be like every anchor tied around your feet just came off and you can fly. But you have to resolve those traumas first.
So, with that in mind, I think this is a good place to talk about what it looks like for us to reframe. So, I know, we both had our practices, and I don't think anybody does the same thing the same way. I'm sure there's some overlap here. When you go on to help people reframe, what does that look like from start to finish?
When people come to us, we have an interview process where we talk to them about, well, what brings you here to be with me today? And what are your expectations? What do you feel like I can do? And in my case, because I work so strongly with spell work and cleansing, a lot of people are just like, oh my gosh, this has been coming on for years. This has happened now. My husband has left me and I need to get him back and I'm losing my house. And so they come to me at a point of severe trauma when everything is falling apart around them, when I could have helped a lot more a few months before. So for me, a lot of it is triage. It's figuring out, okay, what do we need to address right now? Because a lot of times if we address a core trauma, smaller traumas are taken care of in the process of doing that. And
Absolutely.
so it's figuring out what is the core trauma and then reframing that to them so that what has happened to them becomes something manageable for them. So they're going to come to me and saying, oh my gosh, everything is just falling apart. I lost my job. My husband left. We're losing the house. CPS is coming for my kid, just whatever might be happening. And saying, okay, take a breath. Let's look at, wow, you must really feel disempowered right now. So what are some things you can do that can help move you forward? And so sometimes the reframing is showing them resources that can help them. So you have to be very knowledgeable about what's available in your area for different traumas that happen. Sometimes it's about getting them to see that, hey, this was not your fault. This is something that was done to you, but we can move you out of it. It has as much power over you as we let it have. Sometimes it's a matter of saying, this was something that happened to you, but let's look at how we can avoid that happening in the future. So reframing really has a lot to do with trying to create a proactive way out of the situation so that they don't feel stuck in that place anymore. I used to actually date a therapist, and one of the first things he used to ask his clients that they hated hearing was, are you enjoying your depression? And they're like, oh, of course I don't. I don't enjoy it all. And he said, well, in some ways, this depression is serving a purpose for you. So you may want or need to stay here a little bit longer to work out the things you need to work out. Those things are not easy. So one of the greatest disappointments of many of my clients is the understanding that they are going to have to do some of the heavy lifting.
Yep,
That,
just like Eileen said.
yeah, I'm not going to light a candle and rub a crystal and make it all go away. I can encourage the energy to be receptive to what you're doing, but you are going to have to do the work. So, and they're like, what am I paying you for then? I don't know, man. You came to me.
Um, yeah, yeah, the work piece, and we keep coming back to this place of awareness. I keep coming into that space. So I guess for me, when I'm sitting down with a client, here's the overlap. There is the interview process. Yeah, learning from Katrina, it's called the platica when you're doing limpia. I just was like, I don't know, you can have 30 minutes of my time to talk to me.
And
But
go.
from that, right, literally, the clock is. I have to wear a watch, or my time blindness gets pretty severe, and you will have 4 hours of my time, and then I'll be tired and angry. So for me, what this looks like, and I was trying to envision some of my sessions because they're all they're on an as needed basis. Sometimes folks don't want to talk or share, so we have to have that warm up period. But eventually getting through all of that, what I'm looking for in the reframing process is patterned language. So if they keep going back to the past, or they keep going back to a certain person or a certain space, then I'm trying to take mental notes on that. And I think if you don't have somebody that you can talk to, I have recommended clients because you're not going to get me at midnight. I'm sorry. Like, if you are in crisis, I am so sorry. There are some amazing resources out there, suicide prevention hotline, all of that. But Dahlia, it's probably not. I'm not going to see it. So, in the case of extremes, you want to call those phone numbers, but also if it's not so extreme and you're just trying to work through things on your own, I find that recording is very helpful. One, because you're going to actually hear yourself say it as opposed to writing it down and having to read it. I think that's helpful for some. So I guess I'm offering two options: either write down your thoughts and just write without ceasing, or record, and look for the patterned language. What do you keep returning to? I had the benefit last year of going through an amazing embodiment program that also brought awareness to the need for where do you feel it in your body, and not just where do you feel it in your body, but what types of things are happening. So you might feel it in your chest, but is your chest opening up or is it contracting? Is it, do you feel like you want to push on certain areas of your body, or do you need somebody to kind of help you extend, or do you need to extend that leg or arm yourself? So we're looking for patterns in the beginning stages of the reframing process to know exactly how to reframe. There's also some things I've done with reframing and trauma that include meditation and visualization, especially surrounding abusive situations where empowerment looked like the individual, if they feel safe enough to, going back to a memory and reframing it around what they would have done. So I've had situations where folks were abused and they got to put their abusers in jail. Like, when they came out about their abuse, they were actually believed for it as opposed to what happened
Mm-hmm.
previously. And this is not to bypass the situation, but it gives us an opportunity to look at desire and need, and how that's manifesting in current life. So you're being triggered all over the place, or you have had a moment where you were triggered, and through that visualization process, coming to an understanding of what you would have liked to have happened allows you to say, wait a minute, can I do this in my current life? Can I do it in the present moment? boom,
Mhm.
okay, execute action, etc. And like Katrina said, taking action, like Eileen said, taking action is important. And so, lastly, some recommendations around small rituals. I don't find that like full blown wait till this particular moon and this date are useful in times of trauma. They're useful for other things, but the brain's already working at probably half or a quarter of its capacity when trauma is introduced, or you're re traumatized. So, rituals that are simple and accessible are really important. And that can just be the ritual of showering every morning so that you can just make it out of bed, or including salt in that shower, or, you know, I think there's like text message things you can sign, messages from the universe, I think it's called. You can sign up to get those, and at least it takes your brain out of whatever space it's in, to get you to do a little bit of work until you have the capacity to do more. But that's kind of how reframing goes with me. It's a lot of visualization. It's a lot of hacks and tricks around where you may falter. I think that stems from my my ADHD. I'm like, okay, I'm gonna drop the ball. It's not if I drop the ball, it's gonna happen. So how do we get around that? So I tend to try to give people those kinds of things. You know, and what you'll find in talking to yourself or having conversations around trauma is that, like Katrina said, we're not always aware of the possibilities of what we can do to help resolve or reframe. We might not even think of reframing as a possibility, but the brain doesn't know the difference between real and imagined trauma at times. And so visualization and reframing can be very powerful. So that's my comment.
Also, I love what you said about the what we call the backtacking, which is the where certain conversations you have with the client reference other words and other, almost like they're anchors that they keep coming back to about their mother or about their ex, or you can just see the pattern framework of, even if they're talking about something completely unrelated, they will find a way to draw the energy of the conversation back to a specific situation. And what in that regard, something you want to watch for would be recurring dreams as well. Sometimes
Yes.
you will have dreams where your subconscious is trying to tell you something about the trauma. And
Mm-hmm.
so but dreams are just so symbolic that a lot of times you're not dreaming about what the trauma is. An example of that um, is that I used to have dreams all the time, at least 2 or 3 times a week, about discovering that there is a second floor to my house, and I live in different houses in these dreams. And when I get up to the next floor and oh my gosh, there's a whole attic up here, I find that it's full of cages and tanks of animals, little
Oh.
mice and fish and reptiles and all different kinds of animals. They've not been cared for, but they're all still alive and they've reproduced and their cages are filthy.
Oh.
And so in my dream, I have to just keep trying to take care of these animals and I feel overwhelmed. And so that happened for about over a year before I really talked to a healer and said, look, the dream is driving me nuts. I don't know what to do with this. And they were able to help me figure out that it was because of my healing practice, actually. And that combined with mothering 6 adults and having a very Eric and I have a very interactive relationship. So there's a lot of nurturing that goes on there. And the relationships I have with my friends, that I was being over nurtured as far as giving nurturing,
Mm.
and that I had to really understand that I was not going to be able, I had taken on more than what I could do, basically. So what I did was I started paring down the amount of outflow that I was having. And I kept having the dream, and at last, on one of the dreams, I was able to keep falling asleep and re-entering the dream until I'd cleaned every cage, every tank, and everything was safe. And then I never had the dream again. So that's just an example of ways that dreams can tell us what we need to pay attention to in our lives. Also, our
Absolutely.
weird behaviors can tell us, our
Mhm.
compulsions can tell us. When I was at a very difficult time in my marriage where Eric and I were really struggling with one another, we had very different goals, we weren't connecting well. It just, all of it felt challenging. I got this compulsion to paint all the doors in my house. My house was, it was white on white. I mean, that somebody had painted this house just super white. The doors were white. They had painted the fireplace white. The walls were white. Everything was white. And I was doing a remodeling of the house. And so I started painting the doors. I painted some red, I painted some green, but none of the doors in that house stayed white. None of the bedroom doors, the front door, the back, everything got painted. And I just thought it was part of the remodeling. And I didn't realize for several months I was looking for a way out.
Oh, okay.
And that was why I'd focused so strongly on the doors, was where is my exit? And so if you have a compulsion or a behavior that's repeating itself that feels out of place, pay attention to the symbolism of that. And that can help you understand some of your trauma responses you might be having.
You know, I think it goes without saying that we have a lot of parallels, right? So as you shared a dream, I was brought back into the memory of just before I got married. For the first time, I'm not married now, but as I before I when I was about to get married, the recurring dream was me, my family, and my husband at the time in a Volkswagen Beetle, and we'd be driving, and we would always drive off a bridge. Like the bridge would just end, and we would just drive off. And like there were points where I knew that we were going to drive off the bridge. And I was like, I can't stop driving off this bridge. What does it mean? And then finally getting married, we made it to the other side, but it was like, it was a horrible life. You
Mm.
know, my marriage was what it was, but this dream was interesting that it finished afterward and had a different outcome than I anticipated. And then this compulsion thing, I'm reminded of um, when I was married. I My husband and I had terrible communication, and we were not getting through to each other. And I started running. I started first I did like a little 3 miler, and then I started finding like all these ultimate races where it was like the Spartan and run or die, where they're throwing die at you as you run, and I'm just like trying to complete as many races as I can. And I think I got up to half a marathon doing obstacle course races. And at the end of it all, and it wasn't really a finality for me, but there was a stopping point where I was like, oh my God, I'm running from my marriage. Because training for those, continually running, having people recognize my efforts, all of that was things I was not getting in my marriage. I had empowerment, I had stamina, I had confidence, and I was trying to outrun what I could not get from a marriage. It was interesting, man, those compulsions. And even down to add to what you're saying about compulsions, it can come down to the colors that you wear as well. I mean, I remember wearing predominantly green as I was after getting the news of my husband wanting a divorce. So it, life is not an accident. Rarely is an accident.
You know, it's when you mention the colors, that is so true. And I had a time in my life, of course, as all good witches do, where I wore nothing but black. Everything in my closet was various shades of black. And I just thought that was what you did. You know, if you're a witch, you just wear black. We all wear black. I am the night, I am goth, I am this. And somebody said to me, "Why do you never wear colors?" And it was another witch, actually. And I said, "Well, because I'm a witch, of course." And they're like, "Oh my God, you got to celebrate the rainbow of colors. There's, the whole color magic thing is real. You need to
Yeah.
get into some jewel tones and all that." And so we started talking about why I was wearing black, and it was because I did not want to be noticed. I didn't want to be seen. I didn't want anybody I didn't want to stand out. Don't call on me for volleyball. Don't talk to me. Don't engage me. I am the dark. I'm away. And so I purposely started wearing colors. And it really changes how you feel and who you are based
Yeah,
on the type of color that you're wearing.
absolutely. So reframing trauma, I mean, it's in this latter half of the conversation, we're talking about ways that we can navigate through using reframing or becoming aware of those traumas, and it's noticing or having community notice things about you. So um on the one hand, you guys are getting like your mini course on how to recognize trauma in your loved ones and clients. And sometimes simply noticing is enough. Um, so when it comes to reframing trauma, the first part of this video we talked about how to recognize it, how it can show up, what it can look like in terms of um, people, conversations, things like that. And then we segued into how to reframe working with a healer or working by yourself. And lastly, some things that you can become aware of that are trying to give you messages in your life. If you have more instances, if you have more stories to share about a moment when you recognize that you were playing out a trauma in your life, or if you decide to go home and try any of the things that we talked about, booking an appointment with Katrina or I, or trying to reframe on your own, we'd love to hear about that journey, because invariably we're teaching each other, and so you may come up with a situation or a solution that we hadn't even thought of. But if you enjoyed this, definitely hit that like button and share it with friends if you found value in it. And if you want to hear us expand on any of the things that we talked about today, definitely shoot us a comment and let us know. We'll get it after the fact. Like I said in the beginning, we're building community and space and open conversation. So thank you for joining us, and we will catch you next time on Crossroads of Cognizance. Bye, everyone.